Welcome to LoTech Tuesdays by LoTech and Wild, the podcast for people who live their lives unplugged and for those who want to. Hi, Devin. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Devin Wilson. I live up in Anchorage, Alaska, and I work with Alaska Mountain Rescue.
And what does that mean exactly? What does Alaska Mountain Rescue do?
So we are a group of individuals that are on call 24 hours a day. So we work underneath the state troopers. So if there is, say, an accident or somebody that is overdue, or an avalanche, or anything from, lost hikers to climbers to skiers, or just all across the board throughout the entire state. If anything happens, typically a call goes into the state troopers. They alert us, and then we respond accordingly.
Gotcha. And how often does that happen?
It varies. It tends to be more kind of abundant during the summer, especially when we have high tourist traffic. Unfortunately, it was one of those things where a lot of people come up to Alaska and get in a little bit over their heads. Sometimes it's serious. Sometimes it's just people get scared. They get into the mountains and it's more than what they thought. And, they panic, they freak out, they call for help, and we go in and basically just like hold their hand and walk out. So sometimes it's something just as simple as that. But the point is we're kind of always there when they need it.
Gotcha. Tell me a little bit what it's like to live in Alaska. I mean, what it is that you think is different versus like the lower 48, for example. How easy it is to get over your head if you're a visitor in Alaska, for example.
Oh, geez. Well, first off, living in Alaska is amazing. I did not grow up here. I grew up in Southeast Michigan, Detroit area, which is very much the opposite of what Alaska is. It's very busy. It's very flat. There's not a ton of like outdoor things going on. Typically, that isn't just going to the beach or, riding bikes or things like that. I think the closest mountains are probably an 8-hour drive from there. So very, very different. Being in Alaska, though, as far as like people coming up here and getting in over their heads, yeah, it's tough. I mean, we see so much traffic throughout the summer of, everybody wants to come up and see the mountains and do all the cool things. And I think a lot of people have this kind of misconception of like, oh, like I've gone to Colorado and I've hiked, Long's Peak or all these 14ers per se, where you drive your car up to a trailhead and you hop right down this well-worn trail that 1,000 people hike a week, and they walk up to the summit and they call it good, and they're at 14,000 feet. But they don't realize that even though like some of the immediate peaks in Anchorage are smaller, it is far more wild. You're not gonna just drive your car up basically to the top and then walk 1,000 feet and get to the top. It's a lot of work. There's, a lot of wild animals, moose and bear and all kinds of stuff that are not really afraid of humans. You get into some pretty hellacious bushwhacking too, which could be, an issue in its own. If somebody gets, hikes an hour into the hellacious bushwhack and then rolls an ankle, that's going to be a nightmare getting to them, and then two, getting them out of that. So yeah, I mean, there's a variety of things. I think a lot of people have this, the lower 48 has made getting into the mountains and getting into these areas far more accessible, where Alaska has kind of relied on their own abilities to get in and get out.
Right. So what are some of the technical aspects that you've had to utilize for a rescue? Because I know you're a climber, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, have gear. That's probably too much.
I'm sitting in a room full of it right now.
Oh, how amazing. What I almost want to say, what does that look like? But that this will be a podcast. So what kind of gear are you sitting in a room full of right now? What kind of technical things do you have to do? What's an example of that?
So when we prepare to go out into the field, we have a variety of things. Typically, we have a 24-hour pack is basically like food, clothes, and things to be out in overnight, effectively. And then our bigger pack is typically enough to be out for up to 3+ days per se.
Wow.
Which sometimes that happens. You know, we've recently had a hiker that went up into Crow Pass and never returned. And so we went up, and I think we had people on the ground for almost 4 days looking for him. Unfortunately, we did not find him, and he is still not showed up. And so it's been over a week. He's been overdue. As far as a technical gear, a lot of times we kind of assess it as we go. So sometimes we'll get into an area, we get very vague information a lot of the times when we start. So somebody calls the troopers notify us, give us an idea of what's going on. And it's typically, 3 generations down the line of the truth. And so we have to typically go in and kind of find out what's actually happening. So a lot of times we'll either send in a helicopter to kind of do like a flyover and see if they can assess it, or we send in what we either call like a strike team or a hasty team, which are typically 2 people that are really strong and really fast that can get in, hopefully find the person or find clues, and then relay that information back to where our command base is, and tell them, gear that we'll need if it's a technical rescue. If it is a technical rescue, typically we have a tech team that will go in with ropes and harnesses and gear to build anchors. And then ideally they would descend or ascend into wherever that individual is, kind of make a better assessment, and then bring in the appropriate gear again. Like if they need a litter to get that person out, or if they just need a harness to help that person ascend, a rope. So a lot of the gear really, like we have general gear that we bring with us, mm-hmm. and we typically have like a trailer that we will bring to our command base. And then we kind of just assess it as we go.
Gotcha. Nice. So how did you get into all of this? You're pretty deep in. This goes beyond just climbing.
I am neck deep in it. So I started it goes back a ways.
Okay.
So I started climbing a number of years ago, and there was several situations that I had found myself in where it went from a just cruiser, great fun day, to a real bad day real fast. Mm-hmm. I guess like a couple examples I was in West Virginia. We were climbing at a place called Orange Oswald. Yep. Yeah. So we were at a wall called Orange Oswald, and we were waiting to get on this route. There was a team of women that were on the route in front of us. So it was a nice day. We decided to just hang out, wait for them to climb it, and then when they're done, we'll hop on it. The first climber, she attempted to climb it, couldn't finish the route, so she came down, and her partner then got on and finished the route. And when she was being lowered from the anchors, when she got to the second, I think it was a second clip, so she was probably 20, 25 feet off the ground. the rope got coiled up inside of she was using a gree, which is a self-locking camming device. So the rope got coiled up inside of it. And instead of just, letting go and uncoiling the rope and then continuing, she uncammed it, which released the rope. And that girl fell from that second clip and hit the ground.
Oh,
and
no.
She hit the ground probably, 10 feet in front of us.
Right.
And just a pile. So that was an eye-opening moment, and everybody kind of like panicked, like, what do we do in this situation? She basically, we watched her hit the ground and fold in half. She ended up being okay. We ended up kind of like assessing the situation, and she was able to get up after quite a rest period and walk out on her own. But that was the timing right there.
Yeah.
And then actually, I think it was within just a couple months later, we were ice climbing in northern Michigan, and there was a group of people climbing on a wall just down the trail from us. And the gentleman that was climbing took a lead fall, hit his knee on the ice on the way down, and actually like split his patella, so his kneecap. He actually split his kneecap in half. So I think I was the first person to get to him aside from his friends. And when we looked at it, his kneecap, half of it was in place and the other half was like an inch above where it should have been.
Yikes.
And this was one of those situations where we are, 2 miles or so, maybe less than 2 miles from the trailhead.
And did you have your wilderness first responder training yet at this point?
At this point, I did not.
Oh.
And so these were a couple of the things that kind of like spurred me into like, hey, like if I'm going to continue to do this, and I'm going to continue to find myself in these situations, this is something that I probably should familiarize myself with. And so after all these 2 events happened, I kind of started looking into different classes and self-rescue courses and things like that. And so I started taking like rescue courses through the American Alpine Club. And the more I did, the more I wanted to know. So I took like an intro class and then an advanced class, and then just kept going and going and going. And just really fell in love with the whole process and all the knowledge, and I just couldn't get enough of it. So that's kind of what ultimately led me down the way that I am now.
What do you recommend for a starting point for somebody who wants to learn these things?
I think
what's the first one?
I mean, getting a woofer, a wilderness first responder, or at least wilderness first aid, is a great way to go. Some of the courses, you could do it over a long weekend. Some of them are spread out over time, depending on what level you want to take. Some of them might be like a week-long course. But it is so much knowledge and so much useful information. It was one of those things where when I was getting all my certifications, as I was going through, I was like, I've definitely found myself in this position. Like, this is really good to know.
Yeah.
So I think that's really like a great way to start. But also like, reaching out to different organizations, gym climbing, for example, is becoming a huge thing.
Yes.
And within those gyms, we often find sections of like the American Alpine Club or other various climbing organizations. And a lot of times those organizations will offer like intro to self-rescue or things like that. So getting in contact with those people, getting to know those people, and getting into, courses like that are a great way to go. And a lot of like the intro courses are relatively inexpensive. So I know a lot of people, they look at like AMGA certifications and like, holy smokes, these things are so much money. Like, why would I invest that much money into this? Well, the intro classes are not going to be that.
Right.
So I think those are great ways to start.
I think mine was that when I did wilderness first aid and self-rescue things, it was through the National Outdoor Leadership School through our college.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And sometimes that varies. Like most colleges will have that.
Yeah.
Some a little less degree than others. I know most schools on the West Coast are going to have that, but like a lot of the big colleges in like where I grew up in the Detroit area did not really have outdoor programs. Like they didn't really have, outdoor leadership or outdoor management or, things like that. But they're progressively, obviously, like that was back then. Those are progressively becoming more and more popular, and we're seeing those programs come up, kind of up the chain into the school system. But yeah, absolutely, like colleges or universities or even like community colleges would be a great resource.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point that, even if you're doing it for recreation, having some sort of information that, it just in case something happens, because one thing leads to another. I mean, maybe you innocently start off gym climbing or gym bouldering, and then, or maybe you start off at, a local ski slope, and then before you know it, you're backcountry skiing. You're, decided that you're going to go, with your best buddies to go and climb all the 14ers because you just love, climbing so much and hiking around and doing that sort of thing, and anything can happen. I mean,
and I think sometimes, and kind of going on that, I think sometimes people have this kind of monochromatic view of what mountain rescue is, and they always think that it's like this crazy big thing, where sometimes it's not. Like sometimes it's like, hey, this person just went out to walk the dog and twisted an ankle and they can't walk, and they're only a mile off of the trailhead, but all of a sudden it's getting dark, they haven't come back, and we all know in Alaska rain is common.
Yeah.
And it gets cold really quick. And that could turn into a serious situation. So sometimes it's not always what people think. Like, and I think being prepared helps to prevent those things. So if you're going out, even if going out for a 2-mile walk around a well-known area, bring a little bit of extra, bring a small backpack with, a warm jacket in case you do end up having to be out there overnight, or a rain shell, or like extra food, things like that. These are all little things that you can do to increase your likelihood of making it out of there.
Yeah. I think those are really solid tips for sure. Yeah, definitely. I think that's the, the times, like a lot of the time also people think about, in mountain climbing, like ascending is the hard part, where really descending is the hard part. You think you get everybody's all excited about making it to the top. They don't think about how dangerous it could be coming down.
Yeah, I don't remember. I want to say it was in Alpinist magazine or something like that. And I could have my numbers wrong, but I'd read somewhere that they were saying that 80% of accidents that happen in climbing are on the way down.
Yeah.
So on the descent, whether it's whether it's right, exactly. They're on that high of like getting to the top, and then they have a lapse in judgment, or they make it to the top and they don't realize how fatigued they are. And when you're fatigued, you have your judgment kind of goes to the wayside, or you're cold, and these are all factors that kind of go into a simple mistake, a misstep, or something that causes you to fall, or not tying a knot in the end of your rope and wrapping off the end of your rope, which is a catastrophic event.
Right. And what you said, even about like just taking your dog for a walk and being getting into some sort of an accident and being, at the mercy of the elements.
Yeah.
That's definitely something. Do you know who David Goggins is? I'm sure you do.
I do know David Goggins. Yeah, that's a wild human.
Yeah, he is. I was reading his book, the one with Jesse Eitzler wrote it.
Okay.
It's something about like my life with the Navy SEAL or something like that. And Jesse Eitzler basically had him over to live in his house for 1 month only 1 month. But believe me, that month sounded like it felt like 10 years because of everything that he put him through. And so David Goggins, when he was leaving, he wanted to give them a gift or something, or maybe like midway through, he got the whole family gifts. And what he got was almost like escape backpacks or whatever for everybody in the family. Like
basically like a bug out bag.
Yeah, but full on, they had a little infant at the time. And so it was like a full on fire protection suit that you can wear in case this building starts to go down. And
wow.
And there was some sort of giant inflatable raft that was in there, which always makes me think of Grown Ups, the movie Grown Ups with Adam Sandler when he pulls the thing. So I mean, do you have something like that? Is your whole family all geared up?
My whole family, no. Me, yes.
Yeah.
So like typically I have like my kit, my rescue gear, and I have it mostly all laid out or pre-packed. So when I get the call, I can basically grab it and take off. And I tend to keep all of my stuff relatively close, typically in this big gear room that I have. Because typically when we get the call, they give us a general like X subjects missing, caught in avalanche or something, and then that kind of gives me an idea of what gear I need, and I can grab the extras just in case.
Yeah.
But yeah, typically my stuff is all like pre-packed. I have like my 24-hour pack and my overnight pack, and I can just grab those, throw those in my car, and take off.
Yeah.
And be ready to go. Because last thing you want is to get out there and be the rescuer that's unprepared.
Right. Of course.
Get out there and be like, oh, I got to stay out here overnight and I didn't bring a shelter or I didn't bring food, So.
What do you think about those beacons? They have jackets with beacons and, like Avalanche.
Oh, like a Reco device?
Yeah. Are you
Avalanche beacons? Yeah. So I think there needs to be some clarity. So there's avalanche beacons and there's the Reco thing. So an avalanche beacon, really what it is it's a transceiver. It's an item that sends out a radio wave, and other beacons can pick up that radio wave. Mm-hmm. And so it'll give you an idea and kind of direct you to where the source of that radio wave is coming within a certain radius. So it's whether it's like 30 or 60 or 70 meters radius, it'll kind of direct you to where it's going and tell you how far you are from that. Now, what we see in Reco is, so you'll see a lot of like rain jackets or, other clothing, pants, ski pants that have a little microchip in them. And basically what that is it is something we have, it's called a Reco device. And basically if somebody, say, is buried in an avalanche and they don't have a beacon, but they have an article of clothing with that chip, we have basically it's like a big magnet, and it scans over the snow and it can pick up that chip. It can also pick up things like electronics. It can pick up cell phones and key fobs and things like that. And then it'll kind of alert you to what is underneath that snow.
Right. What kind of depth are we talking about here?
It varies. We had one incident a while back of a gentleman that was caught in an avalanche. He was out snow machining and was caught in an avalanche up in Seattle Creek. And by the time we had dug him out, he was 13 feet under the snow.
Okay.
So it's a pretty substantial amount.
Yeah.
Ideally, you want to use the beacon first. So we would use the beacon and see if we can get anything. If we don't get anything, then we'll go to the Reco device.
Gotcha.
And actually, the Alaska State Troopers just recently got this really cool thing. It's basically it's a Reco device that hangs below a helicopter. So we can only get into avalanche areas if it's safe.
Yes.
So if there is somebody that's caught in an avalanche and there are just other avalanches coming down all around, we're not going to go in there and look for them.
Right.
Because chances are we're going to get caught as well, and that's not going to be good.
Right.
So if they end up in that sort of situation, they now have one that they can effectively hang from a helicopter and fly over and see if they pick anything up to kind of give us an idea where that subject might be.
Excellent. Wow. That is great technology. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Because prior to that, it was a lot of times a big waiting game or avalanche mitigation. We might have to go out with a specialist and set off avalanches or, investigate with the local avalanche forecasters, see what the snow conditions are like. If they're bad, sometimes we'd have to go up in a helicopter and actually drop explosives out and trigger those avalanches in order to make it safe for us to get in there.
Right.
Another downside to that, though, is you're triggering avalanches, which are then dumping more snow on top of who you're trying to find.
Yes.
So it's, there's pros and cons to it. We're making it safe, but we're ultimately also making it hard sometimes.
Right. Do these natural areas, is there typically somebody that does go out and regularly trigger avalanches so that I'm talking about, I guess, probably the more heavily used areas, like they do in Colorado, for example? Is that an Alaskan process too?
As far as Alaska goes, typically no.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately it comes down to the amount of traffic. Like the traffic that we see up here is not even remotely what Colorado is saying.
Yeah.
Like they are tenfold what we're seeing. So they'll do avalanche mitigation at like Alaska at the ski resorts and high traffic areas.
Gotcha.
But like as far as like the backcountry areas, most of the time, no, they're not really doing that. They do have avalanche centers and they have people that will go out on a regular basis and like look at the snow and dig pits and check the snow conditions. And then they come out and they put out a forecast similar to like a weather forecast. So, so you can go on their website, you can check it and say, okay, there's a high risk of avalanche. Probably not a smart place to be, right?
Yeah.
Or you can say, hey, snow looks stable. They're saying it's stable. Like we're probably in a pretty good spot. But just like weather, it's not 100%. There's a lot of variables that go into causing avalanches.
Sure.
So
I wonder, what is this divining stick that these mysterious avalanche forecasters are using? By the way, did you know that Pete Carter, who's the president of Valdez Adventure Alliance, is an avalanche forecaster for the state of Alaska? But
I knew there was a couple people. Yeah, I knew there was a couple of people. I didn't know he was, but I did know that there was a few people that were affiliated.
Yeah. What is this great divining stick that they have that they can forecast avalanches? It seems like such a black art, if you ask me.
It is. It's some wizardry.
Yes.
It's definitely complex, but this is one of those things too, kind of what we talked about earlier with getting the knowledge. People that are starting to, we're seeing a huge influx of people going into the backcountry. Going into deeper into the mountains and skiing that backcountry and snowboarding and just hiking and climbing. And it's very dangerous back there. But there are like Alaska has the Alaska Avalanche School. They have the Guide Collective that will teach you basic avalanche awareness. And it's typically like a couple day course, and they really break it down, like what to look for, how to judge if conditions are safe. And if you want to go even beyond that, they have pro level courses, which are a lot of what these avalanche forecasters are using.
Yeah.
Where, they're going out and they're looking at the snow literally under like handheld microscopes and looking at the crystals in the snowflakes and really breaking it down. And it's like, they've got it down to like a science. But for the average person, they don't need to know all that. They have the opportunity to go to these like AVI-1 courses and get that basic information to help keep them safer when they go into the backcountry. And that's one of those things where I think it's absolutely essential. If you're going to be spending time in the backcountry, that course is absolutely priceless.
That's fantastic. And how can somebody find a course like that?
Really, like any place that has mountainous recreation is going to have some sort of course like that. Probably the most popular one is ARI. That's a nationwide thing. Like I said, any big mountain area in Colorado, Wyoming, Washington, Oregon, California, they're all going to have some ARI course that you can get in and get your avalanche certification.
How do you spell that? Is that a web? Is there a imagine there's a website?
Yeah. I want to say it's AIRE.
Okay.
It's something is right around there, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And that's a great way to go. And most like local areas will have some sort of course too. So like up here, we have really two. We have the Alaska Avalanche School, which is probably the most popular one. And then we also have the Guide Collective, which is made up of a handful of IFMGA certified guides. And they will go out and teach you those courses as well. And both of those are phenomenal resources if you're going to be in the Alaska area.
Fantastic. Yeah. Are there permits that are required for all of those backcountry areas? For example, I went to Kauai to go and do the Nepali coastline, to Kalawao Beach. It's there's like this big long process for getting all of your permits to even be able to go back there. So, but not in Alaska?
Yeah. You don't see that as much in Alaska. Like, I know there's definitely like in the lower 48, there's some places that are a little bit more well protected. And I think I could totally be wrong about this, but I think a lot of with just the sheer amount of traffic that place would see.
Yeah.
So like, I know I climbed in the encampments in Leavenworth in Washington. And like, we had to apply for a permit just to, like, if we wanted to stay overnight, we had to have a permit. And it's like a total lottery. Like, it's not just like, oh, you get a permit and then you go. Like, you apply for it and maybe you'll get it, Right. And so we were fortunate enough to get that. But up here, I think because, we have a state that's a third of the size of the continental US.
Yeah.
And there's only 750,000 people that live here in the entire place.
Yes.
So even if you factor in all of the tourists that come here in a year, that's still less than any major city in the lower 48.
Gotcha.
So
yeah.
I think.
And I was talking to somebody too who was telling me that that you guys didn't get like or you were still using DSL, like you weren't, like Alaska didn't even have really like wireless and optimized fiber optics and all of that sort of stuff for but at the same time here you guys have got this crazy tracking magnet device thing, like how on your helicopters now. And
yeah, Alaska is not a place of excess, I should say. Alaskans really get what they need. So having like this crazy fiber optics stuff is typically not what most people are too concerned about. But being able to find somebody that's buried in an avalanche is a little bit more, more something that we would need.
Right.
I would say Alaska is definitely a little bit behind on the technology side of things. But I mean, we still have, Wi-Fi and cell phone, and like we still have all that like basic technology.
Right.
But the newest technology is not racing to get up here.
Right. I imagine it's very difficult to be able to install it also. And so, also, how many people do you know, or what percentage of the population do you think live in dry cabins or damp cabins?
Oof, that's a tough question. I couldn't tell you, honestly.
I mean, besides Anchorage,
quite a lot.
Yeah. Do you think,
So go ahead.
Do you think that there are people that are even in Anchorage that are living in dry or damp cabins?
Yeah, probably. Absolutely. Yeah, not uncommon. It's actually, so the Alaska Railroad, the train that it'll run from Seward all the way up to Fairbanks, is actually, I think it might be the only one in the country now that will actually stop wherever you want it to stop. Because there are people that live out in these crazy remote areas, and they'll hop on the train and ride the train out. And then when they get to this random spot, they'll just be like, okay, stop. And they'll get off the train and then, either walk or get on their stashed four-wheeler and ride to their cabin that's 100 miles away from the closest building.
Wow.
So it's it's so much so that when the whole COVID thing happened, I was like, there are legitimately people that are living out in the bush right now that have no idea what's happening to the world.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Because the only time they come into town is maybe for a medical emergency. They live off the land, they hunt their own food, they gather their own food, and they just live out in the middle of nowhere and are not bothered by anybody. So there's no reason that they would even know that this stuff is going on.
Yeah. And just, can you explain for those who don't know what a dry cabin and what a damp cabin are?
Sure. A dry cabin effectively is a cabin with no running water, no toilets, no sinks, nothing like that. Most of them will have like an outhouse that they use to go to the bathroom. A damp cabin might have a little bit of water. A lot of times you'll get cabins that will like collect rainwater because we get a lot of rain. So they'll collect rainwater and use that as their water source. But most of them, no electricity, no gas, no water, things like that. And this is how a fair amount of people live up here.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people in the lower 48 probably cannot even fathom it, even though with this whole van life movement that's been happening and off the grid life stuff, I'm sure there are a lot of people that dream of it, having no idea how hard that must be.
The problem with that is, and we see this pretty often, the problem is they dream it, and then when it becomes reality tends to kind of kick them in the mouth, and it's a really rude awakening. And like I saw this when the first time my parents came up to visit me after I moved up here, they were like, "Oh, we want to get like a rustic cabin," and I was like, "Hold on a second, like how rustic are we talking?" Because like your rustic is not the same as Alaska rustic. Right. Like we can get a cabin with like electricity and running water, but like if you want to get like a rustic cabin, it's gonna be, you might be in for a wild ride.
Yeah. And so I think it's very interesting because, we have so few people that really, if this whole apocalypse thing did happen, how many of us really would be able to take care of ourselves,
Yeah.
And I think that the instincts are almost the instincts themselves. I believe that we're really animals and that we were born with the potential for those instincts to to be utilized, but they're taught out of us,
Right.
for a lot of the, practical matters. And some folks I think are so removed from it. They've completely bought into, the societal structure that is in place in suburbia or urban areas or whatnot, that perhaps they're not even giving it a second thought. And that even might be why the rise for the van life and the off the grid life, or the suffer fests that have been happening out there. You know what I mean by suffer fest, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like the whether it could be any sport really, but endurance sports or climbing or ice climbing. Actually I was talking to Christian McConnell from Loa Boots earlier, and he
Okay.
was telling me about the what did he call it? The gasping barfies from when you have
Oh,
your
the screaming
the
barfies.
screaming barfies. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the screaming barfies. Yeah, that's a great time.
Yeah. I was like, I don't think
So
you're not really selling ice climbing here. Talking about, but then I mean, there are probably some people that are up to the challenge. They really want to know firsthand what the screaming barfies are really all about. So,
right.
you
I feel like in cold weather sports, ice climbing and mountaineering and alpine climbing and things like that, the screaming barfies are kind of like a rite of passage. It's kind of a thing that
yes.
you deal with, and it happens every once in a while, and you learn really quickly how to avoid them. It's kind of like in any sport, like if you took up cycling, like the first time you ride, maybe 30, 40, 50 miles on a bike, like you pretty quickly figure out, okay, maybe I should have invested in those padded bike shorts, because
Yeah.
it probably would have helped me a lot right now. Um,
Yeah,
so
there's a
yeah,
learning curve. Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes it can be pretty steep. So
And so to that point, so you're the Valdez Ice Climbing Festival 2022 safety team lead, and we so appreciate you for taking up that task. What are some recommendations that you have for people that might be attending? Gear wise, maybe
yeah,
training wise?
I mean, training, if you're going to train, I guess it's tough, because I don't want to put people, say, get on his training schedule, and then they come down and they climb and they're like, oh man, like I'm probably never doing this again. But I would say, like, anybody with like general fitness can do it just fine. Even if you don't have general fitness, just being able to come down and climb, even if you don't make it up the ice at all, it's just a fun experience, just to be outside, and it's such like just a captivating area when you're in that canyon in Keystone Canyon, and you have these 150-meter frozen waterfalls all around you. It's just, even if you're not climbing, just looking at them, is you could stare at those things all day long and not get tired of it.
It's so
um
beautiful.
it's gorgeous, yeah. But as far as like gear wise, definitely layers. Bring layers. Prepare for the wind, because that canyon turns into just a bottleneck of cold wind. And definitely check out some of the gear rental places. Like when you get into Valdez and you go to the community center, um, check out some of the places that are renting gear. Get a nice pair of boots. Check out some of the other stuff. Warm multiple pairs of gloves. Typically, I say bring a pair of gloves for climbing and bring a pair of gloves for not climbing.
Okay.
So bring big heavy gloves for when you're kind of standing around, and then bring like a probably thinner, a little bit less warm glove for when you're actually climbing, because sometimes it's hard to hang on to the ice axes when you have a big bulky glove or a mitt on. And then when you're not using those gloves, keep them inside your jacket. So
Warm.
yeah, so as close to your body as you can. If you have 2 jackets, put them inside both of those jackets and keep them close to your body. Because nothing is worse than trying to warm your hands with a cold pair of gloves. Because it's not super effective.
Right.
So being able to take those gloves out of your jacket that your body has been warming and putting them on, it's a total game changer. And that could be the difference between having a really good time and having a really bad time. It could help you avoid the screaming barfies.
Gotcha. Excellent. Okay. And what was I just, what if someone was wanting to go adventure and they are rock climbers and they have harnesses and they have ATCs? Does their regular harness and their regular belay device work for these?
Typically, yes.
Should they bring tools?
If they can get tools, sure. Otherwise, you can rent tools for free at the event. Mm-hmm. The tools that you rent might be, depending on where you're borrowing tools from, might be a little bit sharper, might be a little bit newer. I have definitely seen people that have shown up and be like, oh, I borrowed these from this old timer that lives next door to me. And they're like this axe that's older than them, that's like straight shaft and weighs like 12 pounds, totally ridiculous axe, right? And I'm like, hey, let's maybe try something a little bit more modern. But who knows, like at the same time, they could use that axe and that could be the perfect fit for them. They could love that axe. And if that's how it works, great, then have at it. Sure. I know plenty of people that still climb with ancient equipment because that's what they love.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it is, on the one hand, the technology for these sorts of, for this sort of gear is always advancing. And, and then on the other hand, it is an investment. And a lot of the times once we start using the gear that we have, we do create a lot of memories with that gear,
Absolutely. And this was something like when I was coming up in climbing, and this kind of like lays down on the stewardship bed, if you will. Mm-hmm. A lot of when I started, a lot of the people that I kind of surrounded myself were very willing to give me things, and that was very advantageous. So like getting started big, hey, like I've got a whole bunch of extra draws I don't ever use. Here, you can have these. Or like, hey, you can take these ice axes or take these crampons and you can use them as much as you want. Well, whatever. Like I'm not using them. That's fine. And so like for me, like I try to reciprocate that. I try to kind of pay that forward. So like there's been times where I've been out at a crag and somebody's got either old gear or they are climbing without gear that I think they probably should have. And I've got some, I'm like, here, take it, keep it. Yeah. It's yours. And if you don't want to use it, give it to somebody else. Nice. So it's kind of one of those things where like just trying to keep that mentality alive of like being all encompassing and not being, kind of exclusive. Being like, well, good luck. It's nice to be able to like reach out and be like, here, I'm going to help you out because I was helped out.
That is excellent. That I completely agree with that. As a matter of fact, I recently came across a website called Rerouted, and it's specifically for used outdoor sports gear, skiing, snowboarding, climbing, mountaineering, that sort of thing. And I thought, what a great idea, really. So,
yeah. And I will say, like, it's one thing if I'm giving my gear to somebody, I know the gear typically, and I know that if it works, I'm not going to give compromised gear to somebody because that could be again catastrophic.
Right.
And if you're unsure, if somebody gives you a bunch of gear, don't be afraid to ask somebody that might know. Like, hey, will you double check this and just verify? I think it's okay. Will you verify that it's okay? Because somebody might catch something like a slight, flaw in any piece of gear could have catastrophic outcomes. So having maybe like a second look at it from somebody is usually a good thing.
Good point. I think that's a really good tip.
Yeah, and that's like you'll probably notice a lot of like retail stores have a hard time reselling protective gear for that reason.
Sure. Yeah.
So
No,
like if you went to like most of the time, if you went to like an REI or something and they got a helmet return, instead of turning around and reselling it, they're just going to destroy it because of the liability.
No, that does make a lot of sense. I think that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's neither here nor there whether if you ask an expert to just take a second look at it, if you're not sure if the pro is in good shape or not, yeah, especially when you're talking about things like ropes and belay devices or harnesses or something like that. Sure. Yeah, for sure. And then also like, I think Kendra was telling me that there was, to your ice axe point, there was a young lady that was just distraught thinking that she was unable to climb and couldn't do it in the ice and stuff like that. And then when she took a look at the crampons, they hadn't been filed for probably forever. So, I mean, there could be some little things like that too, just like simple improvements or whatnot,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of one of those things, like any person that's been in the climbing arena for a while typically would be more than willing to help you out in that situation. If they're like, man, I'm really struggling, like I don't know what to do here. Like most of the time, like, hey, try this, or let's take a look at this. And like, I always carry a file in my pack during ice season. So like, yeah, if they're struggling, like, hey, let me sharpen those for you real fast. And then we'll try it again and see if it's any better.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think, your typical rock climber too, probably never, this is something that's very specific to ice climbing. Your typical rock climber is not going to be carrying around a file, I think. Yeah. Well, so I want to thank you for your time. So I'm very happy to have you on the podcast, and I look forward to seeing you in February for the Valdez Ice Climbing Festival.
Yeah, I'm super excited. It's always a good time to be down in Valdez and getting on that ice.
That's great. Thanks again for listening to LoTech Tuesdays by LoTech and Wild. This podcast supports Valdez Adventure Alliance up in Valdez, Alaska, where they strongly believe in nature therapy. Their goal is to bring this to those who will appreciate it, one might say those who need it. Their focus is teaching through play. They are strong encouragers. The events and resources that they provide will help people find the satisfaction of self-accomplishment through effort, of climbing, of riding bikes, of hiking, of trail building, of immersing in nature. They encourage people to allow themselves to surrender to the flow of the vast beauty of those mountains and the Prince William Sound. Their objective is to be a resource for people to find deep happiness and healthy outlets for themselves in these ever-trying times. We would like to shout out to some of the Valdez Adventure sponsors, including IMBA, International Mountain Biking Association, Access Fund, Protecting America's Climbing, and the American Alpine Club. Some local sponsors include the City of Valdez, the CVEA Community Foundation, Alyeska Pipeline, the Fat Mermaid, the Prospector, Valdez Avalanche Center, Raven, Alaska. We'd also like to give a big shout out to Loa Boots, Tiger Tail, Hyperlight, the National Scenic Byway Foundation, Mountain Equipment, RAB, and Nick Wax. Thanks again for listening and enjoy your day.